Hi, I'm Jonathan Green. Welcome to this week's Car File. Now, over the series, we've tested roadsters, saloons, hatchbacks and executive cars. And last week we covered performance cars. Well, as a special this week, we're sticking with the power theme as we take a look at three high-powered saloons from the sports, family and executive market. Representing the sports saloons, we have the Subaru Impreza WRX. With 218 brake horsepower and full-time four-wheel drive, it's pretty much a road-legal rally car, giving great performance, yet all of the practicality you need in an everyday saloon car. Representing the saloon cars, we have the all-new Vauxhall Vectra GSI. It's got all the practicality of the best family cars combined with a 208 horsepower of its V6 and a top speed of 155 miles an hour. Certainly not your average family car. And in the executive car corner, we have one of the most powerful BMWs you can buy. Take one great handling BMW 5 Series, upgrade the brakes and suspension, add a 400 horsepower 5-litre V8, and you have the superb M5. It may be a big car, but it doesn't stop at hitting 60 at 5.3 seconds. So with power figures from the sublime to the ridiculous, with three very different cars, but all with their strengths and weaknesses, this is going to make for some very interesting tests. Given the choice, I'm sure most people would say the Beamer is best. It's got all the power and all the flash. But if you're the sort of person who likes to drive hard through country roads at the weekend and test your driving skills, well, surely the Subaru is the one for you. It's as close to a rally car as you're going to get. But then again, is the Subaru a bit too loud and in your face for many people? Could the Vectra then be the perfect answer, giving both comfort and sports car performance? Well, let's find out with our Car File tests. First up, it's Subaru, and when it comes to looking at performance saloon cars, there's no better heritage than Subaru. After all those years of winning world rally titles speaks for itself. Well, for a genuine high-performance car with genuine everyday practicality that won't cost you the price of a house, we'll look no further than the Subaru Impreza. Looks-wise, the Impreza is certainly not shy, with its curvaceous lines being dominated by the large rear spoiler, front splitter and huge air intake, which are necessary to feed the air into the Subaru's turbocharger. It also sits on large alloys and low-profile tyres to give optimum cornering performance. On the inside, the Subaru is much more functional than stylish, with a sports steering wheel, clear rev counter and speedo, and the fabulous rally seats which really hold you firmly in place and are actually very comfortable. Now, although this latest Impreza still shouts attitude, it's a lot less aggressive to look at than the model it replaced. But don't be fooled by any of that. This is still very much a rally car at heart. Now, of the three cars we're testing today, this is the one I was most excited about. I've heard so much about it, and with its rally heritage, well, you know that it's not going to be a dull ride. Now, when you first set off in the Impreza, you may not see what all the fuss is about when you're driving around town. But take it over 3,000 and suddenly all hell breaks loose. And it's no wonder, because this thing does 0 to 60 in 5.7 seconds and handles like a dream. The way that the Impreza uses its power is quite incredible. Four-wheel drive, there's absolutely no need for traction control here. And it's no surprise that this does 0 to 60 at only 218 brake horsepower, but it still does it 5.7 seconds every time. The cornering in this car is quite incredible. I'm going faster than I normally would into a corner, but it just grips like nobody's business, and there's absolutely no roll, both in and out. Now, it's very grippy and very solid, and it may not be to everybody's taste every time, but if that's what you're into, well, you found the right car. But one thing that is disappointing about the Subaru is that all the attention is on the performance, and maybe that's purposeful, but really there should have been a little bit more attention given to the interior looks of this car and to a certain extent the exterior. It really isn't that stylish, and I have to say from the inside it's downright disappointing and typically plastically Japanese. I do like the racing styling of the Momo steering wheel and of course the bucket seats, which actually are nice and comfortable. They've padded those out so they're not a real rough ride. But that's about as far as I go in terms of the interior styling, which are anything to write home about. Now, throughout the Car File series, we've had a lot of performance cars that don't quite sound as good as they probably should do. The Subaru certainly does, with that boxer engine, really give you that full growling sound. Now, when you've got all that performance under the bonnet, you need brakes. And this has got them in spades. Out of the corner and away you go, but you have no fear that this thing could stop on a dime. So the Impreza may look less intimidating than it used to, but it still drives like a demon. The engine not only makes a great sound, but once the turbocharger kicks in, it pulls incredibly hard too. And we'll get to 60 in 5.7 seconds, topping out at just under 140 miles an hour. The most impressive aspect of the car, though, has to be the way it takes corners. You can see now why this car is so good on the rally circuit. And as for practicality, well, you don't get this kind of space in the boot of a Porsche. Now, I know what you're thinking. There must be a downside to this car. Well, there is. Costs, fuel costs, insurance group of 19 and servicing costs are much higher than in a regular saloon. So perhaps the trade-off is the Vectra. Now, a sporty Vectra isn't a new thing to Vauxhall, but a sporty Vectra that can deliver what its badges suggest is, as the last models were a far from thrilling ride. Well, as Vauxhall's intensive advertising campaign has been telling us for the last few months, this is an all-new Vectra, and it has to be said that Men and Motors were very impressed with the 2.2 CDX model we tested on Motor Week at the beginning of the year. Now, I'm not so sure about the front end of the new car, but the rest does look great and makes the Vectra seem altogether more grown up. As this is the SRI, we get bigger alloy wheels, twin chrome tailpipes, and of course that top-of-the-range 3.2 litre V6, which is not only powerful, but it has a good amount of torque. To keep all that power where it's needed, the SRI also has traction control and electronic stability units fitted. Now, that classy exterior is taken into the cabin, which really is well put together and feels very solid. And if it's gadgets you like, well, this has got a lot more than the Subaru. Now, of the three test cars, the Vectra was probably the one I was least looking forward to driving. You get the feeling that you get in one of these and you hang your jacket up in the back and head to your sales meeting. But I actually say after a few minutes I've been pleasantly surprised. This is something quite different from Vectra. Now, okay, it doesn't have the performance of the Subaru, but it does have a very sporty feel to it and that much stiffer chassis. It's something that Vauxhall have really been working on. They've stiffened it up and made it a lot more responsive and sporty, and it works. Certainly, you've got a much better handling car. Now, to keep you on the road, it has all the gizmos, like electronic stability control and traction control. But you need it because compared to the four-wheel drive of the Subaru, all the power is coming out of the front-wheel drive here on the Vectra. Now, the one thing with high-powered front-wheel drive cars is they tend to get a little bit skittish when they get on uneven surfaces. But the Vectra seems to hold its own very well. It's very composed on the road, and that's a testament to this brand new chassis that they've got. Well, for all the stick that the last Vectra got, the new one deserves as much in praise. It really is a nice car to drive. In the SRI format, you do feel enticed by the B roads rather than being put off by them. As for fuel economy, well, the V6 engine isn't that much more thirsty than the 2.2 four-cylinder at 28 to the gallon. But of course, those figures will drop dramatically if the Vectra is driven hard for long periods of time. And like the Subaru, it has an attractive price tag when you look at all the kit you get. I'm actually more impressed with the Vectra than I thought I might be. And though it can't compete with the Subaru for performance, it certainly has a sporty feel to it. And its looks, I think, will appeal to more people than the Subarus. And the more I look at the Subaru, it's pretty ugly. But what isn't ugly is the price of both cars, both under 21 grand. But if that is still not in your price range, then there's an alternative out there in the shape of the Seat Leon Cupra R. It's got 210 brake horsepower, has a top whack of 140 miles an hour, and the best bit is it costs under 17 grand. Well, after the break, we'll have a review of the Cupra in our alternative car test. And of course, we'll be driving the fabulous M5. Join us after this. Welcome back to this week's Car File Special, where we take a look at sports, family and executive cars which really pack a punch. In part one, we tested the Impreza and the Vectra. At 21 grand, they both offer great performance and great practicality at a price that wouldn't rule them out as an everyday family car. Next is the BMW M5. It's over twice the price of the other two cars and has almost twice the power. No doubt about it, the front of the Beamer says it all. 400 brake horsepower and loads of aggression pretty much sums up what the M5 is all about. combining the ride and refinement that any executive car would be proud of with the power that a supercar wouldn't sniff at. From the outside, only the massive wheels and menacing exhaust pipes give the game away that this car is a monster in disguise. The sheer power of the V8 engine and the overall weight of the car means that there is no real need for spoilers and splitters here, just smooth and classy lines. And on the inside, the M5 is pure luxury with electric everything, all put together with a solidity that we're used to from BMW. It's double the price and almost double the power of the Vectra and the Subaru. But the question is it twice the car? Well, the first thing you notice about the BMW M5 is it just wants to pull through the gears and keep on pulling all the way through the rev range. And the engine note of that V8 engine is absolutely superb. Now, you'd think with all that power and being in a big executive car that the handling and steering would be somewhat wallowy, but you'd be very surprised with the M5. It isn't at all. In fact, it's so precise and so responsive that it feels like you're in a much smaller sporty car than you really are. Now, forget the fact that this is the top of the range 5 Series, and with that you get all the gadgets like the satellite navigation, television, telephone, leather seats, electric this, electric that. Put all that aside because you don't need it. The reason you're going to buy a car like this is pure and simply because of the engine and the performance that it gives. Now, one alarming thing is that while I'm enjoying this beautiful drive and listening to that sweet engine, out of the corner of my eye I can actually see the fuel gauges moving. In fact, there is a little dial that tells you of your consumption, and at one point we've had it under 10. So if you're on a budget, maybe this isn't the car for you. But because it's so big and so responsive, it gives you a sense of safety and confidence. And with traction control added to that, it really does want to make you go faster and faster. Now, although you're driving one of the fastest cars on the roads, you're also sitting in absolute opulence. It really is beautifully put together. And while some German cars are a little bit austere and a little bit bleak and black, this is very nicely put together and very classy and finished off brilliantly with a chrome touch. Now, before I wax too lyrical about this beautiful car, there are a few things I don't like. There's plenty of space up front for the passenger and the driver, but back at the back, there really isn't much room at all. Your knees are rubbing against the back of the front seats. And also, there's one problem with the gear shift I don't like. Reverse is pretty much right next door to first gear. Get that wrong in your new motor car and you'll know about it. Now, of the 3 cars, I'd have to say that the Subaru probably still has the edge in chuckability and handling. But this car isn't far behind, and of course you've got it all in the luxury of the M5. But this is a pure racing car, and it continues the heritage of BMW's great history in touring cars. Safety-wise, we've already mentioned the traction control. It's got airbags everywhere, and because it's a bigger car than the other 2, if you did get in a smash, there's just a little bit more metal around you, and so therefore you would be just a little bit more safe. The executive cars we tried last week had great performance, but this is, well, this is in a class of its own. Whoop! Fantastic! Now, although the performance cars that we did last week on paper have the similar sort of statistics to this car is just so much more responsive and sharp, and you really feel as though you're in a racing car. Without a doubt, the M5 is one of the greatest cars I've ever driven, and despite its size, it's still genuinely exciting and involving. And those performance figures pretty much say it all. 0 to 60 in 5.3 seconds and a limited top speed of 155 miles an hour. But all in a package that still makes the M5 feel like a real driver's car. And as for insurance and fuel costs, well, this isn't a car for those on a budget. Of all the cars this week, it's the M5 that surprised me the most. I just didn't expect a car this big to be so responsive and alert, and in terms of power, it's absolutely unbelievable. And as well, as I said at the top of the programme, this really isn't a genuine head-to-head. That really wouldn't be fair, but we will be showing you the scores of all the cars in our car file system at the end of the show. But now it's time for our alternative car report, and this week it's the Seat Leon Cupra R. The Seat Leon Cupra R is one of those cars that on paper seems too good to be true. Price-wise, it comes in at $16,995, which is certainly not silly money in today's standards. Performance-wise, it boasts some healthy figures. 0 to 60 in 7.2 seconds, though many magazines have done it under 7. Top speed is a shade under 150 miles an hour, which is quicker than most of the hot hatch competition, and its mid-range acceleration is class-leading. So having got your expectations racing from reading the specs in your favourite magazine, are you going to be disappointed when you see the Leon in the flesh? Not at all. Bodily, the Cupra R is the same as the standard Cupra, which with its huge front air intakes and the sinister looking headlights make the front look every bit the aggressive hot hatch that it is. However, we've always thought that the back of the Leon makes it look a little dopey, but we're being picky here. It's when you move on to the performance parts that the Cupra R begins to stand out from the standard Cupra. The wheels get a size hike to 18 inches and are shod in extremely low profile tyres which hide the larger brakes that are used on the R. You also get a larger diameter exhaust to cope with the extra power of the Leon's 1.8 turbocharged engine, which now boasts 210 horsepower. To help the Leon handle this extra oomph, there's also revised steering and suspension settings and a stability control program to help prevent the car stepping out and losing traction on the corners. Although the Leon is based predominantly on the VW Golf, the interior is taken from the Audi A3, so there should be no worries about quality here. When it comes to equipment levels, the Cupra R is well spec'd, with electric windows, climate control, a cracking stereo and a CD changer, with the only option being Recaro seats at a cost of £1,200. Space-wise, whilst there is cramped, as the Leon's sloping roof limits headroom and you may find your knees pushed up against the front seats. So all very impressive, but it's out on the road where the R really excels. The engine really pulls well with bags of power right through the rev range, and though it's easy to spin the wheels when pulling away, it's very easy to drive it quickly once underway. As we've already mentioned, the Cupra R has considerable handling upgrades over the standard vehicle, which give it much more thrilling and competent drive. The steering is razor sharp with bags of feedback, which is an area that many cars lose out on. And though it is possible to unsettle the Leon, when pushed very hard, it's still extremely stable and composed when being hurried, even on an uneven road surface. Given its VW background, the Leon is extremely refined when being driven hard. The engine note isn't annoying or overbearing, and there is little in the way of wind or road noise, which all add up to the Leon being a great all-round performer. So it performs well, it looks good, and it doesn't lack the build quality and refinement of its VW and Audi cousins. And whilst the insurance group of 16 won't suit younger drivers, that still works out better than the equivalent Golf and Audi. Residual values are also great on the Seat at over 50% value retained over 3 years. So if you do have a budget of under 20 grand, yet you still want a great performing hatchback, the Seat Leon could well be your perfect answer. So that's our 3 cars tested, but before we have our car file scores on the Subaru, the Vectra and the BMW, it's time now for our 3 alternative high-powered vehicles. If Super Minis are your thing, then how about a supercharged Super Mini with a Cooper S? Not only will it get you to 60 in about 8 seconds and top out at 126 miles an hour, it is without doubt one of the most stylish cars on the market and may even make traffic wardens start to smile at you. If four-wheel drives are your thing, then there's the BMW X5 4.6i. At 54 grand, it's one of the most exclusive 4x4s you can buy, and performance-wise, it's staggering. The X5's engine produces just under 350 horsepower, but despite its size, it will still accelerate to 60 in 6.5 seconds and go on to nearly 150 miles an hour, though probably not in a field with a horsebox on the back. And finally, if you thought estate cars were for aging antique dealers who never drive above 30, well, think again, as here we have the Volvo V70 T5. With a turbocharged engine pumping out 250 horsepower, this estate will get to 60 in just over 7 seconds and has a top whack of 155 miles per hour. Just the thing for eating up the motorway miles, as any traffic cop will testify. It's time now to find out how our 3 test cars fared in our car file test, as we judge them for style, handling, performance, practicality and value for money. First up, it's handling, and here the Impreza gets a rare 5 points. It seems no matter how hard you push the Subaru, it won't get out of shape, and the steering is supremely sharp and has a great feedback. The Vectra gets 3.5 points here. Although the steering is very light and lacks feedback, the car does corner very well, with only slight amounts of body roll on the tightest bends. And the M5 gets 4.5 points. Although it's a big car, it's still amazingly poised and precise with great steering. It really makes you feel as though you're driving a much smaller sports car. Next up, it's performance, and here the Subaru gets 4 points. It's extremely fast, both in a straight line and when cornering, but it's the way the engine keeps pushing that makes this car so exciting. Its brakes are also first class. The Vectra gets 3.5 points. Though not as raucous as the Subaru, it's still genuinely quick and does feel as though it wants to be driven quickly. And the M5 gets 4.5 points. Never has such a big car given so much excitement. The engine has so much power and torque that it pulls away at any gear, yet get it to the red line and this car is electrifying. On to practicality, where the Subaru and the Vectra both get 4 points. They have good head and legroom for drivers and passengers and ample luggage space in the boot. The BMW loses half a point here, as despite its large boot, it has surprisingly small rear passenger space. Next, it's style, and here the Subaru gets just 2.5 points. As to be quite honest, it looks a little quirky rather than sporty. The Vectra, though, gets 3.5 points. At long last, the family Vauxhall has real identity, with a shape that is both classy and purposeful. And the BMW gets 3.5 also. Although the shape is very sleek and smooth, it's perhaps almost too understated considering how the car performs. And finally, it's value for money, where the Subaru gets 4 points. It has amazing performance mated to great practicality, and though running costs are quite high, you can't deny that this is some motor car for 21.5 grand. The Vectra gets 3.5 here, as it's a great drive, is really well equipped and is relatively cheap to buy and own. And finally, the BMW, which scores 3.5 points. It's got all the kit, all the performance and holds its value well, but buying and running costs are big when compared to the Subaru, which has similar performance. So the total scores: the Subaru gets 19 points, the Vectra gets 18 points and the BMW gets 19.5 points. Now, although the BMW scores the most points, it isn't really a serious head-to-head, as all three cars excel in their own field, and they do it all with plenty of grunt.